So I got this jig, this dowel making jig off of Amazon. It was about 20 US dollars, and it was from a company I won't even attempt to pronounce, but that is how it was spelled. And it comes in a little cardboard box. It comes with a T15 star wrench to adjust the carbide cutting tool, which I'll show you in a second, and the appropriate size Allen wrench. First time you pull it out, it does have a really good solid feel to it. It's machined aluminum. Looks like the anodized coloring of black and red on the outside is really nice. There's maybe 5 or 6 different brands that look like they're selling the exact same item. I couldn't really tell the difference. I chose this one. They make them in metric as well. This has the capability of doing a dowel as small as 5/16 all the way up to 3/4, and it's really easy to adjust. It's like currently it's set to cut on 5/8. So to adjust this, you would loosen the outside screw and slightly loosen the inside screw and just rotate. Take that screw out of there, and you just rotate the cutter head to whatever size dowel you want to make. So if I want to make a 3/8 dowel, I'd rotate it there and put my screw back in, and I'm set to do 3/8. And I will go ahead and take the entire center piece out. So here's a close-up of the center piece, and there's a 4-sided flat edge carbide cutting tool in there, and it looks to be pretty sharp from the factory. So I'll be really curious to see how this works. So the idea is you pick whatever size you might want. So in this case, if I wanted to do a 5/16 dowel, I would find myself cut down a piece of square stock, slightly larger, and then chuck it one side into my drill, I suppose, because of course this didn't come with any specific instructions, and maybe take a little knife and kind of round off the front point and run that through, and that should spin, cut against the carbide tipped surface there, and out should come a dowel on the other side. I imagine since I'm cutting against the side grain of a piece of wood like this, the dowel would come out a little bit on the rough side, but if it's chucked in a grill, I should be able to just take a piece of sandpaper and sand it smooth and have a bunch of working dowels. So let's set this up to do a test, and we'll see how it cuts. Now it does come with, and of course the star bit is to rotate the carbide tip once one of the sides get dull. It does come with the 3 screws, 1, 2, 3, to mount this to some kind of a workbench. I think what I'm going to do is probably mount this to a piece of scrap wood that I could then put in my vise. All right, well, I tried it once and it seemed to work pretty well. So I had some scrap little pieces of walnut laying around. These measure out to 0.318 inches. I'm just going to take that, chuck that directly in my drill, and then take a little knife here to shave off a little bit of the edge so that it'll fit in the initial opening, and then simply stick that dowel rod into the slot here. And voila. Oh, let me keep that chucked. And once it runs through, I'll take a little sandpaper to it. And I have myself a dowel rod that is hair under 0.3. So I think 5/16 is about 0.31 1 something inches, so it's slightly undersized, but if I needed to create myself some dowel rods, this seems to work pretty well so far. So I've got my dowel making jig mounted in my bench vise. I've made this little holder for it to hold it securely and for easily to take it off and on. And the jig, of course, didn't come with any specific instructions. So the first item that you think about is how am I going to attach my rough stock to my drill. In this case, this is a 5/16 inch walnut dowel that was made. So this was a pretty easy thing to come up with. You know, you just open up your drill chuck and it slides right in. If you're starting out with a pretty small piece of stock, and you can drive it that way. I do have a drill with a 1/2 inch opening, and that is not big enough to make a 1/2 inch dowel, because a 1/2 inch dowel you have to start off with bigger stock than it would fit in your 1/2 inch chuck. So in this case, I've got a scrap piece of poplar, and this is 16 millimeter by 16 millimeter, and excuse me for going back and forth between metric and imperial. I use metric mostly in the shop, but I did end up buying the imperial English jig. But so in this case, I thought about how am I going to mount that in my drill chuck. And the first thing I did was just kind of, see how this end is rounded for the start end, but I ended up rounding that thinner so it would fit in my 1/2 inch drill chuck. And I ended up snapping off that end a couple of times, and so that was a failure. So then I thought about drilling a hole in the end, running a screw in there or a nail of some kind, attaching the drill chuck to that, and that really didn't work really well. So after thinking about it for a while, I came up with my secret weapon, and that is just using a standard socket. So I sized this properly, and that's one of the reasons why I started out with 16 millimeter square, because that fits pretty well into a 13/16 inch deep well socket. So I can just slide it in there, and that's going to hold that in really well. I use my little impact driver attachment to go there, mount that in my drill. Okay, we're ready to start creating a dowel. So I'll show this in front of the camera. I do have the end of this rounded a little bit, so it'll start off easier in the 3/4 inch opening. And my drive socket's mounted on there securely. And we'll just go ahead and put that in there, and we'll drive it through. Starts the rounding process. And now we'll stop the camera for a second and reset the jig down to the next smallest size. All right, now that we're done with the 3/4 inch cut, we'll shift this over to 13/16 and commence cut number 2. And now we'll go from 11/16 to 5/8. next step, down to 9/16. So in this case, starting out with that 16 by 16 mil blank, my 9/16 size is a completely rounded dowel. So the next time I make one of these 1/2 inch dowels, I could probably start off with a 14 by 14 millimeter possibly. But let's move on to the final step and cut this down to 1/2 inch. And there we go. We have ourselves a 1/2 inch dowel. So I'll try to give you a little bit of a close-up of this. You can kind of see the socket in my hand and what was formerly the square part of this blank jammed down in that socket. So it does work well, and you'll have to experiment with what size sockets you use depending on what size rough stock you're starting out with. But to me, that's worked out really well, and I ended up making a bunch of walnut dowels for a project for a friend, which I'll show some video of that in just a second. Some finished video. They're actually walnut donut holders for a wedding. So overall, I would give this little dowel making jig an actual A+. For $20, I think it's a pretty good deal just for me to buy pre-made walnut dowels for my little wedding project. Would have been more than $20. So this paid for itself in the first go through. Works well. The carbide turned out to be very sharp, and I'm very happy with this purchase. Hey, so if you saw value in this video, I'd appreciate if you consider subscribing to the channel. Certainly give us a like and thumbs up, and stay tuned for more helpful videos. Thanks.